5.5. 5.5. Did you see where the Florida Gators over under is 5.5? That is hard to reconcile, I have to tell you. After watching the last 10 years, maybe not, but the 20 years before that were really good times at Florida. And it really is hard to wrap my head around the Gators being that low in the grand scheme of things. Let me look a couple other schools up for you here. LSU at 9.5. Let me see the Tennessee Vols, who a lot of people think will be Georgia's major competitor. 9.5 for the Vols. Bama's at 10.5, and of course Georgia is at 11.5. So that's pretty high. This is as of just after the July 4th holiday. Georgia at 11.5, Alabama at 10.5, Michigan at 10.5, Ohio State at 10.5, Florida State at 10. The Taters at 9.5, Liberty 9.5, LSU 9.5, Oklahoma 9.5. Now that will be that. The thing listen, Oklahoma had a lot of tight losses last year. Maybe they break their way this year. I don't know. Tennessee with 9.5, some other schools up there. But that Florida is so low, lower than Auburn's 6.5. That is hard to reconcile, I have to say, because how are they in this roughest shape? I mean, like, you basically are saying if you bet the over, you're not guaranteed. You bet the over at 5.5. You're not guaranteeing that they have a winning season overall. They'd go 6-7 in theory. In theory, I know these numbers are for the regular season, so let's not just like betting, bro. Right, relax. First of all, but yeah, I mean, 9.5 for Clemson is as low as I've seen for them in a while. At Florida State at 10, with the two of them playing in Clemson. Okay, the Jackets at 4.5. That's pretty low too. I don't know. Kentucky at 6.5. There's some curious. There's always curious. The Rebels at 7.5. TCU played for a national championship against the Georgia Bulldogs and got smoked, but they're 7.5 now. Pick up. You can read about that game in Double Dogs. You're going to get our 2023 preview with it. Make sure you're picking this up now, because the offer is going to change pretty soon. You can only get this at Red Zone or down below. That's it. You can't get it anywhere else. I do want to just show one other thing. I'll put this in there too. This is a hat that Red Zone just came back out with. It's exclusive to Red Zone. It is their foam trucker hat. So if you want to be like everybody else, this is not your hat, okay? It's like we had when we were kids. Did y'all have those hats when you were children? The mesh hats. But anyway, it's a very nice hat. I have to say, it's a very nice hat. It's not going to look good on me right now because my head is full of hair. Way too much hair. Those of us who have hair later in our lives, hopefully this isn't too late in my life, but those of us who have a lot of hair, it's a whole thing, and then I have to take it off, Not for this video, but you can get that for yourself in the link below. The trucker hat, again. Old school too, by the way. This is when Georgia won the national championship in baseball, and that was 1990, back when there were trucker hats, I guess. I don't know who brought those back. Ashton Kutcher. It's a fancy private school name. For Georgia at 11.5, that's high. I mean, that is a high line. That's basically saying, are you going to beat Tennessee on the road or not? That's basically what that says, because Auburn's at 6.5. When you go to Dog Post and you take a look at schedule, there's not a lot of obvious losses here. Tennessee, Martin, Ball State. South Carolina, I think, could be curious. I'll talk more about that in the future. I do not expect Georgia to lose that game. UAB at Auburn, almost said Alabama. And then the Cats, they're going to Vanderbilt, which should be a win for sure. And then they host the Florida Gators. Play the Florida Gators in Jacksonville. They host Missouri, which is now the homecoming game. If you missed that, so that's going to be the homecoming game for Georgia. And then like the Greek balls, the Ole Miss Rebels will come down, and I'm sure all the sororities and fraternities will be very excited about that. that game in Athens. That will be a major weekend in Athens. Some of these weekends in Athens are not that bad. There's no major game, but South Carolina, that will be a big social weekend. Same thing with Kentucky, although not as much as Carolina, Missouri, and Ole Miss. South Carolina will be the biggest social weekend. And then obviously at Tennessee, and then they're going to host, then they go to they may as well host Georgia Tech in Atlanta. That's how that game is usually played, but the couple of days after Thanksgiving. So that, this will be the final time that we see this type of schedule for Georgia. I know in many ways I'll miss it. You get so used to playing teams at a particular time, play the Gators just after or right on top of Halloween. The Florida-Georgia game is just a total rite of passage. Auburn not being in November is hard to get used to. It still is. It's not been in November since 2019, but if you're as old as I am, you something feels a little off about that game not being played then. At least it's not in September, which is when you've seen a lot of Georgia Carolina games. And more, I got a lot of South Carolina friends from going to undergrad in South Carolina at Coker. They are not pleased with Georgia and Carolina not playing that game as predicted by somebody talking to you right now. But I think it's even a little bit more irritating for them than I expected. What's so curious about the Carolina folks is I think they'd like Georgia to be their biggest rivalry, but they can't divorce from Clemson. It's hard for them to give Clemson any credit, and vice versa, by the way. I was talking with one Carolina person that I know, a business owner, and he was so adamant that he'd rather play Georgia than Clemson at any time. I mean, sometimes it seems too much. But they got a lot of Texas A&M in them on this front because Clemson's really whipped their ass for a while, and now they beat them by a point at home or on the road. I'm sure that was a tough one for for all the taters out there. But South Carolina not playing Georgia in 24. But Clemson is. So that's weird. That is weird. Like, Georgia did used to do that back in the day before South Carolina joined the league. They would alternate between the two schools. For a little history lesson for everybody who's younger than 30, I guess. For years, Georgia would play South Carolina and Clemson every single season. And then over time, it became a lot. So in the 80s, Georgia, I don't know. I'll have to ask Claude because Vince isn't around anymore. I don't know the exact reason why they stopped playing both of them the same year, but it was clear in 1990 that when South Carolina came into the league, that Georgia was eating 2 more conference games. So they couldn't keep playing both of them. And so what they did was in 90 and 91, they played Clemson. 92 and 93, they played South Carolina as usual. They did not play Clemson that year, which was not as usual. And then in 90, I said, okay, no. 92, 93, they played South Carolina. 93, 94, they played Clemson. And they also played South Carolina those years. And then the Clemson thing went away. It was just too many games. I mean, like, you can't play everybody. They played Carolina forever, and they played Tech, Carolina, and Clemson. 3 out-of-conference, sort of big league games, if you want to call it that. And they play them every single season outside of SEC play. So that's one reason why they could do Jacksonville. They would have these other games where Georgia would play South Carolina at home or Tech at home or Clemson at home. And I guess those would be money games. They would certainly appear to be money games. But those days are gone, and now we, have the weird thing of Georgia playing Clemson in 2024, but not playing South Carolina. So whatever. I mean, but I think this season, that 11.5, I mean, I would take the over, but at some stage, Georgia's going to lose a regular season game. I don't know when. Alabama didn't just rip through these games constantly. Georgia's won 27. Someone else can check my math. Missouri, South Carolina, Mississippi State. They've won at least 27 regular season games in a row. That's a lot of wins in a row. That's a lot of regular season wins in a row. So, can they do that again this fall? Yeah, they can. I mean, they can't win 27 because they're only playing 12.